Chapter 8. Horses Rule. With the oldest three out of the house, life settled down to a bit of a dull hum, and Jane wanted a horse, and Dad accommodated. He bought her a lovely quarter horse that had never been in the barn. I'm sure you've heard the term never been in the barn. It means that a horse has no socialization. She had never eaten anything but pasture grass, never drank from the tank or had her hair brushed or eaten grain from a bucket. She was distressful at best, but she was probably cheap. Dad arranged for Dwayne to take his horse trailer out to some farm and retrieve the horse. Dwayne was the go-to guy in Kingston when talking about horses or drinking. Oh, it was so upsetting. Candy did not want one thing to do with the trailer, the bridle, or the lead. She bucked and reared and twisted and turned trying to get away, so Dwayne put a lip hold on her, which is a loop around the bottom lip, and he twisted it tighter and tighter. Then he got out the whips. A couple of shots of whiskey later, and he and my dad got that horse loaded up, and off we went. We headed back to my Aunt Nellie's barn, where Dwayne had other horses boarded. Nellie and her husband Fred had built a lovely home on the edge of a 180-acre farm. They did something illegal nowadays, but very helpful for families financially. Nowadays, the city and the banks have you and your home purchased under lock and key. You pay $100,000 for a house, but $200,000 in interest over the lifetime of the loan. Man, is this hard on a family. Well, they built a huge, oversized garage that was more like a small barn. It had an open, clean upstairs where they built in a little kitchen and curtained off a little bedroom. Then they moved in. Next, they built the basement of the house and a tunnel back to the garage. This tunnel was only half height, but clean and useful, and allowed them to scoot back and forth without going outside. This arrangement allowed them to spend their money on the house and not on interest for the bank. But nowadays, the health department frowns on you living in a garage, and the city wants the house built faster, and the bank wants your money. This forces you to spend your money a certain way, even though it's not good for you. Sounds like my dress code problem. Just change the book already. Nellie's husband had passed away in the mid-1950s, and Nellie's barn burned around 57. And I think I was in big cotton underwear, so maybe I was 3. I had been at home playing when Robert come flying in the driveway, grabbed me, threw me in the car, and off we went to Nellie's. I don't remember my sisters being around. Nellie's barn was on fire, and by the time we got there, it was well engulfed. The firemen were just arriving, and there was a lot of commotion. Robert took me just inside the back basement door and did that pointing thing at the floor thing and said, "You stay right here." He latched the door behind him, and I stood looking out the bottom of the wooden screen door. There were so many animal noises, and not good animal noises. I could see the men using pitchforks to get the pigs from running back into the barn. I could hear a cacophony of voices calling commands. Barn animals can be particularly hard to get out of a burning barn. Safety is in the barn, so they all fight to run back into their stalls, which makes the whole removal thing even harder. They got the horses and cows out, lost some pigs, but I don't think anyone even thought about the chickens. The barn was lost, but they saved the foundation. The men built a nice top on the foundation, which left the bottom of the barn clean and usable. It was nice for Nellie, as now she had something to rent out for a little income. She would have lost everything after her husband's death if it had not been for the barn fire. Fred had bought fire insurance on the barn, and she used the money to pay off the farm. I know my dad always had an idea that Dwayne was helping out a widow, and maybe something off-colored happened that day. If it did, so be it. It gave her a place to live for the next 50 years. That new barn was where we were going to board our new horse, Candy. I have a very clear memory of Candy eating hay for the first time. She was pigging out. Her mouth was so full she couldn't even chew. She was pushing the other horses away but consuming almost nothing. She wanted it all. We laughed and laughed at her. Years later, when I left home, I felt the same way and would often think of her grabbing and chewing but eating almost nothing. My horse days had started, but I didn't know it yet. Jane did not like Candy, even though she was meant to be Jane's. Candy was totally antisocial, had her own opinions about life, and had no use for a teenager. So Dad bought Jane another quarter horse, and he gave Candy to me because a preteen was obviously going to handle this situation even better. From then on, I was the family entertainment. We didn't have movie theaters or basketball hoops or a park. We had bars and churches, and now we had Jennifer and the horse. Every day there would be a horse report in which the family would laugh and laugh at my struggles. A little training would have been nice, folks. Jane and I spent several weeks putting in a pasture. She was much stronger and better at pounding in the stakes, and I could wire the stakes with insulators and string the wire. You just had to make sure the wire didn't get away from you and roll back up, which created more work on rolling it again. It was a big enough gauge for the work to be almost too hard for me. Jane would help if I got too tangled. Afterwards, we tied strips of old sheets onto the wire so the horses could see it, made a gate, and Dad bought a water trough. We had a pile of hay delivered and stacked out by the old garden and a grain bucket for the oats. The grain bucket was just a garbage can with a fancy name. Candy and the new horse Beauty were great fun in a lot of ways. Candy would play in the trough, splashing you and nuzzling you, but try to ride her and nothing would go quite the way you wanted. Beauty was much more socialized. Our farmhouse had a spot of cement and a door on every side. There was an unused door, side door towards the drive, back porch, and basement door landing. Beauty would chase me around the house from stoop to stoop, then try and pin me onto one of the stoops. She played like a dog would. I never thought she would hurt me in any way, but chase me she did. Well, that was not quite true, as I was afraid of being stepped on. Jane would ride along, signaling Beauty to herd me. What great country fun. Oh, those poor city kids playing in city parking lots and all. Mother had bought a grass rug for the back porch, which was our outdoor living room. She loved that rug. Well, so did Beauty. Jane tied her up to the porch and went inside for just a few minutes, and Beauty ate a huge chunk of the rug while Jane was inside. Mother was furious. She stomped around finding some scissors and cut the eaten side off, making a rather nice, acceptable adjustment to the rug. The next day, Jane tied Beauty up to the porch for just a few minutes, and you know the rest of the story. There were fireworks that night, and then the rug disappeared and it was never mentioned again. When Beauty had a foal, Jane and I would bring the foal into the house, but we never told Mother that. My dad was a member of the Lions Club, and they worked hard to put glasses on the kids that could not afford glasses. The big question was whether or not they could afford the glasses. If the dad and the family drank up all the money, did that mean they could not afford glasses for their kids, or did they just choose not to buy glasses for their kids? Dad felt no matter what, kids needed glasses and deserved glasses. Others felt differently. Nonetheless, the Lions Club worked hard on getting and having money for glasses. One way they did this was a horse fair that they put on each year. Oh, I love the horse fair. Jane and I got to assemble the trophies and unfurl and sometimes iron the ribbons so they looked all crisp and clean. Dad and others would make a long list of events that were divided into two categories: show horse and action. Show horses are groomed to perfection and then judged on ability to stand still, canter, and perform in a variety of ways like a dog show. The action was way more fun with barrel races and jumping. One of everyone's favorite was the tire race. Two people started out and one was left hanging onto a swinging tire, and the other had to ride around the track and get back before the hanging partner grew tired and dropped off the tire. This was a timed event and was a lot of fun. It was so much more fun when I was too young to participate. I was just too afraid of my horse to compete, but everyone else thought it would be fun if I took part. I avoided this as long as I could. Sometimes for brief moments, Candy was a great horse. Sometimes for a brief moment, she would mind. Sometimes for a brief moment, she would lull me into this wonderful world where I was in control. I would ride like the wind. The saddle would feel freeing and the wind like a friend. This never lasted long enough. Candy would feel me settling down into the saddle, feeling my own oats, and with a smile or a big laugh, my heart would start to sing. But then she would start to think about the pasture, the freedom of her previous life. And she would stop on a dime and I would go flying. Head over teacups I would go, smack! Always hard on my bottom, wrecking my neck for years to come. Then she would stand over me looking down at it like, what the heck you doing down there, look? It taught me to be fearful of feeling in control because you never knew what was coming next. Dad would always laugh during the horse report. No information on how to handle the horse, just laugh. When I was 11 and I couldn't avoid the horse show any longer, my feet were in the fire. I had to join 4-H. Did I ever ask for a horse? No. Did I ever want a horse? No. Did I enjoy the horse? No. Was I terrified of the horse? No. Did I love my cowboy boots? Yeah. I don't even know how to tell you the next story, but it is a funny story with a perspective of 50 years. It was the night before the county fair, and all the 4-H kids were there in the barn with their horses. It was a warm night. It was a night of possibilities. Dwayne had assembled equipment to tie the horses in the middle of the aisle so everyone had room to work around the horse, brushing, trimming, and shining each aspect of the horse from the mane to the hooves. He had a farrier and a pro with the trimmers, all the parents except my dad, the 4-H leader, and several just interested folks. Our 4-H leader was a solid horseman and looked quite dashing in his assistant county patrolman's uniform, which he wore proudly. There were several men in town that took part, and they made quite the posse for parades. He had a light brown large horse with white flowing mane and tail. I trusted him. I wanted him to teach me something, anything about horses, but he rarely spoke. Anyway, back to the barn. Dwayne had the barn clean. The trailers were lined up out front to take the horses over to the fairgrounds, and everyone was generally excited. I thought this was cool. I could do this. I was the owner. I could take charge. I started to feel like I fit into my boots, walk a little prouder. I had Candy in the barn pasture waiting for our turn in the horse salon. I couldn't wait. I should have just waited. Candy was being so good. I was being in control. So why not sneak out into the outer pasture and grab some apples from Nellie's tree? I know the other kids get hollered at, but she was my aunt, and I'd never done it before. I called to a friend to hop on the back of Candy, and off we went. Now, my friend did remind me that Candy did not like to be ridden double, but she was being so good, and I was being in control. We got the apples, we ate the apples, and we headed back to the barn. Now, I mentioned that Dwayne cleaned the barn, didn't I? Part or all of cleaning a barn is removing the manure. Dwayne must not have cleaned the barn much before this because he created a huge pile of manure just outside the back door of the barn. He'd have to get the front end loader to clean up the mess. Aunt Nellie had lots of farmland to spread it out on, so the question was always when, not where. Do you know the only piece of equipment John Deere won't stand behind? I'll wait. Anyway, as we headed to the wait our turns, old Candy decided she'd had enough. I don't know what her problem was. I had given her a nice big apple. She bucked us off and I put my arm out to brace the fall. Now, if I'd ever had any training in horsemanship, I would have been taught not to do this. I slid hand first into the now growing bigger and bigger mound of shit. It was no longer manure, it was now shit, and I was sliding through it full force. It filled my sleeve, my pants, packed into my long hair, my shirt, my pockets, my boots. I even slid on my face for a while, so I had a nice road burn packed with shit on my face. I jumped up and looked at my arm. I hugged it and ran into the barn. The problem was I was at the wrong end of the horse, and nothing scared me more than the wrong end of the horse. I had to slide past and get to the head end where everybody was standing. I got there panting and held my arm up, saying, "I think I broke my arm." Well, hell yes. Both bones were broken just above the wrist, so my arm went along like normal and then dropped down about 2 inches and continued to my hand. I looked at this circle of faces, and after about 3 seconds, all the faces turned white. The drunk said, "Somebody get a box to put the arm on." Then, "Reva, get your car." My brother Robert was there with his wife Karen. Robert said he would drive the family car over to the hospital. We all packed in. Robert driving with me in the middle, and then Mother, I think, or maybe Karen. Quite quickly, they realized the car was on empty. We ran out to the house the long way around because the road was out to see if Dad wanted to go or if had any gas. No, and no. We headed back downtown again the long way around because of the road to my Uncle Fran's house. We woke him up and drove him down to the gas station so he could unlock the pumps and we could get gas. You would think that would be the end of the story, but no. Nothing is that simple when you're caked with manure and the main road is out. Kingston is situated on State Highway M46. The road twisted this way and that, had fairly deep drainage ditches and many half-blind country crossings. It served as a trucker's route from Sarnia to Saginaw. The trucks came across the Blue Water Bridge, headed a little north out of town, and then headed straight west on M46, right into the many GM plants in Saginaw. Many of the men in Kingston worked in Plant 6 on this side of I-75. The road had many large hills that were deemed dangerous. Then there was the muck. Between our farm and town there was a muck field. It caused many problems on the road and it had to go, so M46 was being rebuilt from the ground up. The men dug as big a hole as they could and started filling it with sand and old unused boxcars. Then they filled and then mounded the sand until it was a great hill. They left this hill there for many months while it pushed down on the muck and eventually replaced the muck with sand, creating a better road bed. To get around the sand hill, my Uncle George had brought boards and created a walkway so we could still walk home. The trouble with this arrangement was the muck was being pushed up and out on each side of the walkway, creating a more and more dangerous situation for the walkers. As I was scooting home on these boards one day, I spied a kid in the muck. He had been there for a while. He was just about waist deep in the situation and looking really desperate and super embarrassed. We never spoke. I saw an extra board I could reach and very carefully pulled it over to him and connected it to the main boards. Another problem I didn't let get in the way of saving this boy was my underwear. Again, I had to have a dress on, and I did. The boy was below me, and to position the board I had to work the strength of my legs, pretty much shoving my crotch in his face. He pulled himself out, looked at me with a petrified look and ran home. He never looked at me again, and I never made him. Anyway, off to the hospital. The back road to Marlott Hospital was full of hills, deep ditches, and twists and turns around swamps. Robert was driving like a bat out of hell, and I was scared of his driving and convinced it would all end in the ditch any minute now. I begged him to slow down, but he was on a roll. We arrived safe, but I was pretty shaken. The hospital was quiet when we arrived. We were ushered into the emergency room, and I was laid on a bed or gurney. Mother immediately wanted to wash me up and grabbed a washcloth and was running water over it when a nurse came into the room and screamed, "No! No water! Please, no water!" By then, other nurses from the far end of the hospital showed up asking what the heck was going on. The rest of the hospital smells like manure. My nurse said, "It's way worse with water." And at that point, we all knew she had some experience with the situation. They knocked me out rather quickly, and when I woke up, I was clean as a whistle and my arm was set and cast. I always figured they took me down to the morgue and washed me off. Probably set the bones right there. When I got home, my arm ached terribly. Mother bought an ice bag for me, which was really good. She also announced that I could not and did not have to do the dishes for the next 6 weeks. And oh my, what a treat. Jane was mad, but I was so happy. The road out front was still being rebuilt, and I loved the huge piles of sand, the large crevasses they made, and the equipment. I could sit all day and watch the heavy equipment work. What entertainment. I also figured out how to ride my bike with a cast, which really set Jane off because I could ride my bike, but I couldn't do dishes. Oh my, could my life get any better? Who knew the broken arm would set me free? The other thing I could not do was show my horse. They made me walk with my sister while she showed my horse. Other than that, I was off the hook. The only thing I missed and really wanted to do was sleep in the barn with the horses at the fair. I never handled the midway very well because it would give me a headache every time. The music was tinny and the rides made me grind my teeth, so I was always happy to leave in the evening. But I did want to sleep in the barn. The fair was over and the summer stretched out before us. One of our jobs was to keep the horses fed and the fence in good working condition. Jane and I would get out a box of supplies and start walking the fence to find places that needed repair. We understood this was a requirement of owning horses. One day, Beauty got out, and it wasn't until she was striding down the middle of N46 that we discovered she had broken out. Oh, God, there is nothing scarier than seeing her out, running free, and the traffic and the thoughts of death. Cars and trucks stopped, and we retrieved her and walked her home. Jane and I had too many close calls with the horses. One of the roads we had the most trouble on was North Kingston Road. There was no margin on the edge of us to ride, so we were often on the edge of the road itself. One day I was riding double on the back of Beauty with Jane, something I rarely did, when we were in front of the Suddens farm. I'm not sure what happened, but it did involve screeching brakes and us tumbling into the ditch. You never wanted to end up under the horse in this type of event, and we almost did. The car stopped momentarily, just long enough to see that we were not dead, and then sped off. Did I ever tell you how much I hated that road? Another time, I was with girlfriends and our horses. We're almost to Wilmot, so we decided to ride up to one of the little stores and get some candy to eat. It was a lovely day, and there were the three of us on our horses. As we headed back, I was so full of myself. I was in control of this damn horse. We were headed to my friend's barn on the west side of the road, our side of the road. The third girl, Liz, her barn was on the east side of the road. We never gave it a thought. But right in front of the two driveways, Liz's horse cut across the road to her barn, and bam! Some poor family from Detroit was out for a Sunday drive and hit her. They hit her hard. She went flying over the car and into her own front yard. She was okay if not shaken, but since she wasn't bleeding, she was deemed okay. The horse rolled onto the hood of the car, and we all knew the danger of this instantly. It's the same problem when you hit a moose. Has to do with the center of gravity being so high. A deer is too light to present much of a problem unless you're in a ragtop. Sometimes the deer get their hooves through the ragtop, and the hooves are very dangerous instruments of destruction. They can slash you pretty bad, and you are belted in and cannot get away quickly. But the weight of a moose, or here, the horse, coming through the windshield can smother you, and there's not a damn thing anybody can do to save you, short of giving heavy equipment to lift the horse off you. But for the grace of God, the horse rolled off the hood and onto the ground. But she wasn't dead. I went into the house for comfort. There was no comfort to be had. The family was all out to the road, and I was alone shaking on the couch. My mother would not help me and insisted I get the horse home before supper. I heard someone say I was in shock, but other than that, I was okay. The county cops came and shot the horse. The family was poor and could not afford to bury the horse for 2 months. It laid in the pasture bloating. It was a problem. Eventually, they got some big equipment and dug a hole big enough for the horse, and then we didn't have to look at it anymore. About a year later, the family had a little cousin killed right in the same spot. And down the road, an early undertaker slid off the road one night. He had forgotten to latch the gurney in the back, and when it flew forward, it cut his son's head off. Did I tell you how much I hated that road? My neighbor was killed one night just a few feet up the road after spending too much time with Father Polanski. I believe they got into the sacrificial wine that night, and she rolled her car on the way home. Funny, because it was one of the flatter areas on the road and there was no ditches. It just must have been her time. We didn't have a barn. Our hay sat out by the garden in a great pile, and we just assumed the outside would mold and the inside would be good. This is pretty sloppy care of the horses because the mold can create all sorts of lung problems. We would shake off the mold before throwing the hay over the fence, but it was still a bad idea. A good idea, though, was to shut off the electric fence before getting near the pasture with your arms full of hay. A good zap will wake you up in a hurry. We had a rule that if you realized that the fence was off, you had to run and turn it back on. An even better idea should have been checking if someone had turned it off on purpose. We were always zapping each other by mistake. Jane and I would take a zap and brush it off, but not my dad. It made him angry. Dad decided to show Jane and me how to feed a carrot to a horse one day without getting bit. I knew Dad's method was totally wrong, but I wasn't going to tell him. We just stood there saying yes and okay and humoring him. To feed a horse by hand, you never want to actually hold the carrot, but you want to present the carrot in an open hand. They will pick it up with their strong lips and eat it. Now, Dad was clasping the carrot strongly when he presented it to Beauty. Beauty grabbed that carrot and tugged on it hard. Did I mention that my dad carried a little extra weight? Now, this belly did him no favors at this point. That horse grabbed that carrot, gave it a nice tug, and down went Dad. Not all the way down, just down over the fence so it looked like he was doing toe touches. When his hands reached his feet, the fence would go off and zap him, and he would stand, well, momentarily stand, then back down he would go, screaming, "Shut off the goddamn fence!" This happened several times, and we didn't know whether to run or laugh. Either way, we were in trouble. The The fence zapper was somewhere near us, but it was still like 2 to 3 zaps away. I wouldn't help him stand because I knew I would get zapped. Jane and I stood frozen, eyes bulging for probably 2 zaps, wondering our next move. Eventually, Jane ran and unplugged the zapper. God, he was mad.